Hello, I'm Bishop Mark Seitz. Thank you for taking part in today's Safe Environment training.
Or volunteer opportunities.
Several of you may have been through our program previously. We're excited about our new training that we believe will have a positive impact on you and on your parish. This updated program shares what we believe, that all people, children as well as adults, have the right to a life of dignity and respect. This means, among other things, a life free from abuse and violence of any kind. Our new training program will teach you the warning signs of abuse, how to respond to it, and how you can keep our parishes, our programs, and our schools safe. Your mere presence shows that you care about our children and anyone who is vulnerable. Thank you for being here today. God bless you as you go forward. Let's work together to create the most Christ-like communities that we can possibly have.
The program you are about to see contains testimony of actual abusers and true stories of victims from real cases of child sexual abuse, and may be disturbing. If you feel the need to excuse yourself, you are encouraged to return to the program to learn the 5 steps for preventing abuse. If you feel that you are unable to continue, please communicate with your facilitator or coordinator.
You have homework?
Yeah, a little bit.
There is so much joy in the smile of a child, especially when the world is bright and everything is new. It is a privilege for caring adults to keep a child's life as safe as possible. Yet we know too well that there are those in this world who would harm children in order to meet their own selfish needs. And if no one stops them, they will continue to abuse. Adults must work together, agreeing to work harder than ever to learn how to build a wall of protection around all of God's children.
I was 10 years old when I was molested. I had to face my molester every day, not knowing if he was ever going to mess with me again. And he did do it. Again, and again, and again.
I was 12 years old, and I felt dirty and ugly. I felt like no one would ever love me again.
I tried to kill myself when I was 15. I just didn't want to go on living. I hated myself. I blamed myself. I just thought it was unbearable. The pain, it was just unbearable.
I was in middle school when I first met Mike online. He became my best friend. Actually, I loved him, and I thought he loved me. What he did to me really hurt.
Among God's greatest gifts to us are our children. They are the hope of our future. Love impels us to reach out to nurture them with great tenderness as they grow towards maturity. And yet, despite our best efforts, there is a nightmare which no child should have to face and no parent should have to worry about. I speak about child sexual abuse. It happens in the most unlikely places and is committed by people we fully expected to be trustworthy. It happens in daycare centers, in our schools, in our youth programs, in our homes, and in churches of every tradition. The stories you are about to hear are disturbing. But unless we bring child sexual abuse out into the open, we cannot hope to protect those we love most, our children.
The pain is still fresh and the anguish runs deep. The Donovan family is fighting back from the day their lives turned into a nightmare, the day they learned their priest had molested their daughter.
He told me he was helping me. I thought it was wrong, but he told me it was right.
I didn't know how this could happen without my knowing. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to take away her pain.
Randy's summer camp turned into an excruciating experience when he was molested by his camp counselor.
He seemed like a really nice guy. He would take us swimming. He let us sneak out of the cabins at night. When I was homesick, he would stay up with me. I trusted him. And then he did it. I've never been the same ever since.
I used to talk to Mike online every day, and even on the phone. Mike asked me out several times, and eventually I agreed, and we went out. Mike had told me he was 17, and he even sent me pictures of himself. But when I actually met him, he looked a lot older. Still, we went on our date and everything was fine until the ride back to my school, where Mike was going to drop me off so my parents wouldn't find out.
The reality is there is absolutely nothing that's private on the internet, nothing at all. As a result, a child molester can sit behind a computer or use a smartphone to roam online from gaming sites to social networking platforms looking for children and teens susceptible to victimization.
Everywhere children, youth, and vulnerable adults gather, there are potential predators and victims, including in the ever-evolving virtual world of the internet. There has been a momentous shift in communication in our society in recent years. Many have traded in-person, face-to-face relational interaction for a virtual and technologically advanced world of electronic exchange. The world in which we live can be dangerous, and as members of the church community, as a vibrant part of society, we must stand together to protect children and vulnerable adults. The Protecting God's Children program is primarily designed and focused on addressing the issues of creating safe environments for children and young people. However, much of what you learn here can be applied to protecting other types of victims, such as vulnerable adults, which could include, but are not limited to, adults who are homebound, in hospitals or nursing homes, adults who are unable to defend or care for themselves, and adults who are physically, emotionally, or mentally incapacitated. Who would hurt our youth and the vulnerable among us? Sadly, a perpetrator can be anyone, anywhere. It seems as though every day there is another story like this, of a child abused by someone they knew and trusted. The abuser can be a coach, a teacher, a member of the clergy, a male or female. The abuser may even be another child.
I victimized the first child as closely as I can recall when I was 10 and he was 5. He was a neighborhood child who looked up to me, and I took advantage of that to lure him into a field behind our parents' house and trick him, manipulate him, force him to take his clothes off.
Some of the things I did to get the kids to trust me was just being their buddy, talking child talk with them to where they didn't feel like they were talking to an adult and being, which would make them more respectful and more scared of an adult. I was talking to them just as a kid to them. And I would play their little games that they did, and just talk to them in such a way that they thought I was just another kid, which broke down all the inhibitions of beware of adults, and plus I was the guy from the church, so there was no reason they had not to trust me when I would say, well, come here and sit in my lap.
These are not isolated cases. Understanding that child sexual abuse research studies have limitations and should be used with care, giving special attention to the scope of the analysis, parameters of the study, and abuse definitions. They show that the numbers of children who are sexually abused by adults are alarming.
Well, between 5 and 10% of adult men say they were molested as kids, and the number is 20% for adult women.
All research has shown that child sexual abuse is a significant problem. Touching a child in a sexual manner or touching the private parts for any purpose other than to keep a young child clean and healthy is child sexual abuse. Additionally, forcing a child to touch the private parts of an adult or another child is also child sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse is not always physical. It may include abusive, non-touching behaviors, such as voyeurism or showing a child pornographic images.
He would always talk to my mom and me at church, and my mom always thought he was so nice. And yeah, he'd have me over to his house to play with his kids and spend the night. And before bedtime, he always wanted me to take a bath. And then he'd start. And I couldn't move. You know, I tried to scream or do something, I just couldn't do anything, you know? And so what I did was I tried to distract myself by looking at different things like the faucet on the bathtub, or, you know, the little cracks on the walls. I just like look at the cracks in the walls, or I look behind, try to imagine what's behind the cracks in the walls, just to get my mind off of it, just to get my mind out of my body for a minute. And then he'd leave, and I'd go to bed, shivering, and I'd try to fall asleep just to forget about it all, but I couldn't.
I was in 7th grade, and I wasn't doing very well in English class. So my teacher would keep me after class to help me. And then she started hugging me and kissing me. And then she finally, I kept thinking that if I was a better student, then she wouldn't have done that. Or if I hadn't stayed after class. I know now that I was wrong in thinking that it wasn't my fault. But how is a 12-year-old supposed to know that?
Sadly, almost all children who are victimized know their abuser, or think they know them, and it can be even more confusing when a child finds a new friend online. While providing almost limitless opportunities for youth to learn, the internet also provides increased access for child abusers seeking boys and girls to victimize. Unfortunately, innocent children may only be a click away from victimization and exploitation.
When Mike pulled into the parking lot, I started to get out of his van, but he wouldn't let me. He started to do things I didn't want him to do. I told him to stop, but he told me that this is what people do when they love each other. What he did to me really hurt. When I walked home that night, I was crying.
A significant characteristic of technology-facilitated victimization is that the victims often fail to identify themselves as even having been victimized. They frequently feel they're in love with the molester or the molester is a good friend. Many adults and young people are still unaware of the hidden dangers of some technology-related apps or the unsafe internet sites such as the many social networking, photo posting, or the gaming sites. If teachers, parents, and other caring adults would go to these internet sites or download a handful of the popular apps, they may be shocked by the content, the photos, and the personal information that they would find.
Hey guys. Okay. Can you help me?
It is clear that one of the best ways for adults to protect children is to cross the technology gap. Predators have already done so. Child abusers use a grooming process to gain access to children. They build trust not just with the child, but with the child's family as well. This manipulative process includes physical, psychological, and community grooming, intended to create an environment that traps children and lulls families into complacency.
How we doing, ladies?
Hi.
Need some help?
Some child molesters are very appealing, socially gifted people. They win over congregations, they win over neighbors, they win over families, they even win over the kids themselves. They can be talented, resourceful, and authoritative, but they use those talents to gain confidence with parents and access to kids to act on their own sexual interests.
Physical grooming involves a physical progression of touches from a normal, acceptable touch to a more aggressive and intimate one. It is done for two reasons: to desensitize the child to inappropriate touch and to confuse the youth about his or her boundaries. Psychological grooming includes actions that make a youth feel dependent on an adult, often involving an aspect of emotional attachment. The molester may shower the child with attention or gifts, provide the youth with drugs or alcohol, or may act as a confidant. The abuser may then coerce the child by threatening a loved one or performing actions to make the child feel complicit, conflicted, or helpless.
Hey guys.
Community grooming provides the abusers with the environment needed to accomplish their goals. Abusers will work to ingratiate themselves into the community, developing relationships with adults and children for greater access to youth and protection against suspicion. And when child sexual abuse happens in a church community, the consequences are limitless.
When a child becomes the victim of sexual abuse, it's always a tragedy, and a serious tragedy, but even more so when it involves the church. It's more tragic because that person, first of all, represents the church, and for the young child, represents God. And so many times we know psychologically that the child cannot make a difference between seeing that coming from God and the church. I also believe that at times we as a church must be honest in saying that we have made mistakes.
When our daughter was molested, it almost destroyed our parish. And for a long, long time, it nearly destroyed my faith and the faith of my family.
Well, I was afraid to tell because he was my priest. My family loved him, and he wouldn't do anything to hurt me. I just couldn't understand what was happening.
Child molesters rely on their power over children to control them. They convince children that adults won't believe them if they tell.
One time, I told her that I didn't want to go to tutoring after school anymore. And she told me that I better not tell my parents any lies about her. I knew my parents were going to believe her over me because she was a teacher and she's just helping me with my schoolwork. And she was so nice to them.
Molesters often leave victims feeling as though the victims themselves were to blame. The kids think that they somehow led the offender on, or that they used bad judgment, or that they were at fault because they liked the offender and the attention that the offender paid to them.
I was giving them an offer. They could run around naked if they want to. So if they chose it, it was their responsibility. So later on, if anything came up, then they would be hesitant to say anything because they'd feel guilty and responsible for what happened, even though it was all my fault.
Many child molesters have a lot of genuine skill in relating to children. They can easily find jobs and volunteer opportunities that give them access to kids. They imagine that they're providing kids with love and attention that they desperately need, and they rationalize away the terrible anguish and confusion that they're causing.
My dream doll was usually a slender, blonde-headed, blue-eyed girls, young. I liked them from the ages of 5 to 10. My victims thought I loved them to death. My victims thought that I was holding each one of them in a special regard. Every once in a while, some of my victims would get a little jealous of some other little girl that I was skating with because they thought that they was my special one.
Even though they were young, I treated them as though they were much older emotionally. And that was, of course, that was part of my rationale and my justification for telling myself it's not that bad. I really care about them. They love me, I love them.
Abuse of children by a trusted individual has terrible consequences. While healing may be achieved through an environment of love, understanding, professional counseling, and support, a child's life can suffer profound and long-term effects. A survivor of sexual abuse may face relationship problems, drug and alcohol abuse, depression, and anger control issues.
It's not something you just get over. You just don't get over it. It's not that simple. I mean, I tried to kill myself. I thought that everyone that looked at me knew that my manhood was gone. I felt dirty, used, disgusting.
I'm almost over it now. My parents have been great. I used to lose my temper all the time, and I'd throw fits over absolutely nothing. I even put my fist through my bedroom wall. But I realized that it's not their fault. How could they have known that something like that could happen at church camp? I don't blame them too much anymore.
Child sexual abuse can be stopped before it starts. And you, as a member of the community, can have a role in protecting all of our children. In order to protect children, we must separate the facts from the myths. It is a myth that child abusers can be identified solely based on their physical characteristics. Abusers can look like or be anyone, male or female, or even a team of people working together, in addition to adults who are married with children of their own. Child sexual abuse happens in all income, racial, ethnic, and other demographic groups, and sex offenders do not fall into one certain category. Sex abusers look like your neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, the people with whom you work, family members, and other trusted adults, and other youth. This abuse is known as child-on-child or peer-on-peer abuse. It is a myth that strangers are responsible for most child sexual abuse. Studies estimate that the vast majority of abuse is performed by someone known and trusted by the victim. The fact is, most sex offenders are also known and trusted by the parents or guardians of the children they molest. It is a myth that most sex abusers are homosexuals. Research shows that an individual who identifies or behaves as someone with the same-sex attraction for adults does not pose a greater risk to the sexual abuse of children. It is a myth that clergy abuse children because of their promise of celibacy. Celibate clergy are not more likely than others to abuse children. Promising celibacy or even taking a vow of chastity does not cause someone to abuse children. as most abusers have never made promises of celibacy. It is a myth that children usually lie about sexual abuse. When they do disclose as children, fewer than 5% of their allegations are intentionally false. If we understand that the majority of children are telling the truth when speaking about child sexual abuse, this means that if they disclose abuse, we need to be able to respond in an appropriate manner. You can be an integral part of preventing abuse from occurring. Learn what you can do to stop child sexual abusers.
If my parents or another teacher or anyone could have spotted one warning sign, then this never would have happened.
I'm still a kid. I'm just different than the other kids. Maybe people can't tell when they look at me, I'm not sure, but I do know that every day has been hard.
Please don't let anyone suffer the way my little girl has suffered.
The people who shared their stories, the victims, their families, and even the offenders, did so in order to make children safe. To prevent abuse, adults must know the truth about child sexual abuse. And now you know.
As caring adults, we must be proactive in protecting the gifts God has given us, our children.
Probably over my lifetime, I fondled probably up to 500.
I started molesting children when I was 10 and was finally apprehended when I was 36, so that I molested children over a period of 26 years for a total of approximately 34 victims.
I asked myself a million times, could I have done something differently? But now I just want other parents to know that they can do something, that they don't have to go through what my family has been through.
When we uncover the truth about child sexual abuse, we have the power to safeguard our children against offenders because we know how they prey on youth. We are not helpless. When we work together, we have the power to protect. There are 5 steps for you to follow that will help protect children in your family and in your community from the terrifying ordeal of child sexual abuse. The steps are: know the warning signs, control access through screening, monitor all ministries and programs, be aware of child and youth behavior, and communicate your concerns.
You know, looking back on it, there were several warning signs. My teacher would keep me, only me, after school. She was overly physical, you know, always touching me. Where were all the teachers? I started to hate going to English class, started skipping, and I would complain about her at home. Why wasn't anyone watching what was going on? You know, why wasn't anyone listening to me?
Step 1 is know the warning signs. Knowing the behavioral warning signs of the potential predator's grooming process is an important step in creating a safe environment.
Most child molesters are well known or related to the children they molest. They look for kids who are comfortable with them or who are needy and therefore vulnerable. They convince parents and other caretakers that they're just trying to help out with homework, with babysitting, with special treats.
Over time, my children would get to know their children. And as eventually happens, my children would go over there to play, and of course then they would come over to my house to play. And I usually took a relatively slow process. Once again, it wasn't that I just grabbed him, ran into the bedroom, and that was it. Once again, I'd start to question him. I'd see how he responded. I'd see if he was responsive. I'd find out about his family. Did he have a father? In this situation, he didn't. And that might be it for the first contact. Unfortunately, I was relatively patient and knew that they would be back over.
Keep your eyes open for concerning or inappropriate behavior, things that may give you that uneasy feeling. For example, you may notice an adult who always wants to be alone with kids, or who seems to be more excited to be with children than with adults.
He always had kids at his house. Oh yeah, he always had plenty of toys. You know, every toy any kid could possibly ever want, he had it. Video games, you name it, he had it, whatever. And he was always hanging around with us.
Child molesters often give their victims gifts as a way to manipulate the child. The predator may not ask your permission, or they may ask the child not to tell. Or the person may go overboard touching children, always wanting to wrestle or tickle them, especially when they don't know the children very well.
They couldn't really tell what I was doing, and so I would caress them in ways that when they felt uncomfortable, sometimes they would get up and go skate, but they never said anything, so I always would just take that as, well, I must have really got close to that line as to what I could cross over, and that kind of told me how much more I could do the next time I could get them to sit in my lap.
Another red flag is when the adult starts talking about sex, or telling dirty jokes, or showing pornographic pictures to the child. The molester is testing the child and making the child feel complicit. If the child doesn't back off at that point, then the molester moves on to the next step.
One of the things I did was to show them pornography. And one of the reasons I did that was, number one, I wanted to see if I could trick them into being aroused. As I said before, I was extremely manipulative. Then I would come back a little bit later and see if they'd, number one, if they were aroused, if they'd picked up the pornography, what they had done about it. Another thing that I was doing concurrently with all this was starting to force my hands on them a little bit at a time.
He would leave dirty magazines out for me to look at. I mean, he knew it wasn't against my religion, and he knew my mother would have a fit if she found out. I knew it was wrong. But I thought it was kind of cool that, you know, he was letting me do adult stuff.
When a child or young person uses an electronic device with the internet, they may be subjected to inappropriate materials or even strangers without an invitation. They can be victimized in a variety of ways, such as cyberbullying or even sexual exploitation through social media, technology apps, or even new internet friends who are not what they seem. Many of the electronic chat features between electronic devices allow for private, one-on-one messaging between individuals. In many cases, these private chats may have webcam or video capabilities, allowing one or both participants to hear and see each other in real time.
Because of the charm and seductive talents of molesters, young people should be warned that whenever they communicate with someone using technology, even if just chatting about homework within an internet gaming site, they should never provide technology-facilitated friends with personal or identifying information, like hometown locations or school names. Even apart from conversation, an innocently posted photo taken at a school can also contain personal information in the background, in addition to tracking information that's embedded in the metadata of the photo, such as the actual GPS location of where the photo was taken.
It's very easy for a child molester to slip into a child's life. all they got to do is show the child any attention, especially if the child feels like they're being neglected at home. Well, then the child molester, he picks up on that and he says, well, what kind of parent would do that? I just can't believe they'd not let you do this. And they become their friend, and boy, if I was your dad, I'd let you do that.
This is a staff-only area.
Another warning sign among child predators is that they don't believe the rules apply to them. Watch for situations where an adult keeps ignoring standard policy or bends the rules with kids, such as letting them get away with things their parents wouldn't approve of.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, Kathy. Why don't you grab a seat?
I need to talk to you about something.
Yes, I can.
Knowing the warning signs and intervening when behavior seems risky or inappropriate helps protect children and those who genuinely care for them from unsafe or even dangerous situations.
It's not always easy to distinguish the person whose interest in the child and family has these ulterior motives. And that's why it's so important for parents to have talked to their children about these dangers.
By paying attention to our own behavior, as well as that of other adults, we will expand the boundaries of our safe environment and serve as role models for others. For example, by being overly physical with a child, a person could be conditioning a child to tolerate certain types of inappropriate physical touch from other adults that they would normally resist, which could have a devastating long-term impact on children. Perpetrators may take advantage of these actions. A good way to measure if adult to minor behavior is appropriate and transparent utilizes the PAN acronym, meaning that any affection shown to a child should be public, appropriate, and non-sexual in nature. If adults are exhibiting these warning signs or other inappropriate behavior, it does not always mean that they are abusing a child. However, it could be characteristic of the grooming process and must be addressed. Step 2 is control access through screening. There are some adults who should be kept as far away from children as possible. While there are no methods that completely prevent child molesters from gaining access to our children, adopting the following proactive access control procedures makes it more difficult for people with bad intentions.
It's important to require that all volunteers and employees complete a written, standardized application, even if they've worked with children in the past. The church has to know about every person that has access to children. When people understand that this is not about not trusting them, but it's about protecting children, including their own children, they'll understand that this is a necessary step.
Whether recruiting volunteers or hiring employees, organizations must make criminal background checks a standard operating procedure. Remember that child molesters think the rules do not apply to them. They have been known to sign an authorization knowing that a criminal history could be discovered, but believing that merely signing the authorization will get them through the screening process and no one will really check.
I've done Santa Claus appearances. I've done the roller skating rink work as a disc jockey. I've done the roller skating rink work as a instructor. I've had my own roller skating rink. I've coached girls softball, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. I've taken them to national tournaments, coached softball for 15 years. These things were so easy for me to get into because nobody ever questioned it. Nobody ever checked my background.
Face-to-face interviews are also important because they give you a chance to meet the applicant, to learn what the person has to offer, and to communicate the church's commitment to keeping children safe.
A thorough reference check of the applicant should be a top priority as well. It helps you answer a very critical question. Is it safe to have this applicant around children at a church or school?
When it was finally over, It turned out that my teacher was fired at her last job because of a student's complaint about the very same thing. If someone would have checked this, it never would have happened to me.
Working with or caring for our children is not an entitlement. It is a privilege. We must entrust our children only to those adults who consistently have proven that they can keep children protected and safe. When we take control over who has access, we make the wall for the perpetrator higher to climb. Step 3 is monitor all ministries and programs involving children and youth.
Sir, can I help you with something?
Yeah, I'm here to pick up my niece.
Well, you need to go into the office and sign in.
Sex offenders often need time alone with a child in order to commit the more aggressive crimes.
Adults need to be aware of secluded areas in and around school buildings and church buildings where a child could be taken alone. Those areas have to be made off limits. That means locking doors to rooms that are not being used and routinely checking places where children can be taken alone. Another important point is that adults should never meet alone with children in a secluded area. They should meet with children in an area where other adults can see them or an adult could walk in unannounced.
Different skating rinks had different areas that I sat in when I would do the music, and some of them were more secluded than other ones. And the more secluded areas, when I could operate as a disc jockey, provided me with a better access to do the more arousing sexual assaults.
Parents and caring adults have a right to know that their children who are entrusted to others are safe.
I'm here to learn more about your child's safety procedures.
Adults must develop a very healthy suspicion about every program to which they entrust their children. It's important that they know exactly who is running the programs, what child protection safeguards are in place, and what the procedures are for dropping in to monitor.
Monitoring all programs means that every program that is sponsored by the church goes through an approval process. That process will guarantee that there will be enough adults present at all times to carefully monitor the program and the children who participate.
Monitoring programs also means examining what access children have to the internet and what they are doing online. When it comes to technology, it's important to be proactive. Install filtering and monitoring software onto each electronic device and regularly review the content. Create procedures at home for consistently reviewing activity and internet usage conducted on your child or teen's electronic devices. For example, encourage a proper and balanced usage of all electronics in an open area such as the living room or family room. Have a conversation about what constitutes personal information. Don't allow a child or teen to post or provide personal information through a social networking venue. You can often stop a predator if he or she knows they are being monitored at all times. Step 4 is be aware of child and youth behavior. You need to be aware of what is going on in the lives of the children and youth in your care. Let them know that when it comes to their safety, you will believe what they tell you, and they will not get into trouble.
It's bad enough being molested and then to have to go tell someone about it. And I just thought it would be better to keep it to myself and not tell anyone. Plus, I really didn't have anyone to tell. I was afraid I would get in trouble. And I couldn't tell my mom because I was afraid she might be mad at me.
Many children will deny having been abused or will even recant after telling. They're afraid of being blamed. They're afraid of being contradicted by a more influential person. They're afraid of what their parents, family, and friends may say. The molester may have even convinced them that they were at fault. but patient, non-judgmental listening will usually allow the story to come out.
Children don't always say exactly what they mean. Sometimes their body language or the way they say something is more important than the words they use. A child may be in danger of abuse if there is a sudden change in behavior. They become moody or aggressive. They lose interest in school, or there is a sudden change in grades. They bathe excessively, or they stop taking care of personal hygiene. The difficulty for observers is that many of these behaviors may be symptoms of other physical or emotional problems rather than actual abuse. Although the behavioral signs do not necessarily mean that a child is being or has been abused, they may be indicators that something may not be right or off. Talk to young children about their private parts and the touching rules. Teach them that their private parts are special, and no adults should see or touch them except to keep them safe and healthy, and then only under specific circumstances. Failing to use proper names for the private parts indicates to children and abusers that these are subjects we aren't comfortable talking about. Not being willing to talk about these subjects puts children at risk.
You need to tell your child that if anyone asks to see or touches their private parts or shows them their private parts, the child should say no and immediately tell their mom or dad or another safe adult, even if the person told them not to tell. One conversation about this with your child won't be enough. It's something that you should talk to your child about often. And it should be just like any other safety rule, like not playing with matches or looking both ways before you cross the street.
Children who are involved in open and straightforward conversations with their families are less likely to be victimized.
The best security measure of all is to regularly and openly communicate with children and teens about the latest evolving technology, discussing the risks and the benefits as well as the potential impact upon their lives.
It is never too early or too late to begin speaking with children about this subject. You want them to know they can talk to you about anything. Step 5 is communicate your concerns. Communicate your concerns when you see something that looks suspicious, inappropriate, or that makes you feel uncomfortable.
It is rare for an adult to actually witness abuse. Most abuse occurs in private with no other adults or children around. In fact, molesters often go to great lengths to make sure they're not observed. But if you maintain a high level of awareness, you can see warning signs that a child is in danger.
I was always taking pictures, and I would take these pictures and put them into a picture album, and I would have the picture album at the skating rink. And this was another tool that I used to get kids to come around me because they'd want to look through the picture, either looking for their picture from the last time they were there or looking for pictures of their friends. And parents should have been aware that this picture book was probably 90% of little girls.
Pay attention to your own feelings. If something just doesn't seem right, don't be afraid to communicate your concerns. You don't need proof of anything to express a concern or observation. When you see concerning or inappropriate behavior, talk with the person involved or speak to their supervisor.
I'm glad you brought your concerns to me.
This is an area where knowledge of your organization's policy and code of conduct are extremely helpful. These documents help you to understand what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior for adults interacting with minors. By communicating concerns, you're not accusing someone of being a child abuser. You are simply pointing out something of concern to you. In far too many cases of abuse, adults have noticed things along the way, but didn't say anything until it was too late.
After we found out our priest had molested our daughter, plenty of well-meaning people came forward and told us that they suspected something. My question is, why didn't they come forward sooner?
Remember your role of being a protector of children. By communicating your concerns and bringing anything that doesn't look right to the appropriate person's attention, you can help keep children safe. Anytime an adult has a concern that is elevated to a reasonable suspicion that a child is being or has been abused, it is the moral and possibly legal responsibility of that person to report the suspicions to civil authorities. Sometimes you may be faced with a situation where you actually suspect child abuse rather than just seeing a warning sign or inappropriate behavior.
All my victims I've always tried to not get caught. Always had the fear of getting caught, and so I would try to do things that either they didn't know what I was doing or that I thought that they were totally asleep. In fact, my victim that I was arrested for, I thought she was asleep.
It is our task as adults to report anything that causes us to suspect that a child is being or has been abused. If a child discloses any type of abuse, a thoughtful, calm response is essential. Your response can have a profound impact on a child's ability to recover and could help the youth more easily achieve healing. After listening, it is imperative that you contact the appropriate child protection agency within the state.
All states have laws that require professionals who work with children to report suspected child abuse. Many require everyone to report, not just confirmed cases, but even if they just have a suspicion. Some people find that hard because they're afraid they might be wrong or that they might alienate someone. But such courageous reports have rescued many victimized kids from terrible torment. You can even make such reports anonymously, and if you make the reports in good faith, you can't get into trouble.
You can find the phone number for the Child Abuse Hotline through an internet search or within a phone directory. You can also find a Reporting Child Abuse link on the Virtus online homepage at www.virtus.org.
If the suspected abuse involves a fellow church volunteer, employee, or member of the clergy, you should also notify a church official after first communicating with the civil authorities.
If you are aware that a child is in danger of abuse at that moment, then call 911. Communicating our concerns is perhaps the most difficult of the 5 steps. We must find the courage God has given us to speak up. And we must speak up before it is too late. You will never know if your courageous action to communicate your concerns will save one child's life or protect dozens of lives. This plan requires that you follow each of the 5 steps. Know the warning signs, control access through screening, monitor all ministries and programs, be aware of child and youth behavior, and communicate your concerns.
The hope is that through education, through prayer, through our working together as a Catholic community, we can create safe boundaries where life is reverenced and where we can move forward.
As we continually progress in our mission to protect youth, we are grateful for people like you who have unselfishly volunteered their time and have enthusiastically embraced the concepts of the Virtus programs. You are an integral part of keeping children, young people, and vulnerable adults safe. By working together, we can identify, prevent, and help to reduce the circumstances of sexual abuse. It is up to us, as caring adults and parents, all of us, regardless of our role within the community, to guide and protect the most vulnerable. Thank you for your willingness to serve.